It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business on the Hogside Network, the show where we look at the dollars and nonsense of the sports media business industry in all of its glory. How you doing today, Steve?
Oh my God. I love it. So one would think that Chris is maybe giving a hint of possibly what we're going to talk about today with his
You know it, brother.
How you doing, brother? What are you
Yeah.
doing? It's just business podcast. That's making my throat. Oh my God, I can't do that. I can talk in Kermit the Frog for an hour. I can't do Hulk Hogan for an hour. You don't remember that, but I did back, the early days of the Hogshead was a lot sillier show. And I did I don't know, half an hour as Kermit in one of those shows. And it finally got to a point where it's like, I just can't do another minute of Kermit. Because I can do Kermit pretty well, but not for an hour. I got through 5 seconds of Hulk Hogan. That was it.
Yeah, no, you gotta use some parts of your vocal cord that you don't normally use. We're not gonna keep up the bit. Although I will say, so we're gonna talk pro wrestling, Vince McMahon, all of it. There's about 32 storylines with them right now. But this is it turns out a bit of a pro wrestling day for me because I think I'm going to go see this afternoon in the theater that movie, The Iron Claw. Have you heard about this, Steve?
That is one thing I thought about going to go see. I don't know if I'll have time this weekend, but I'm not a wrestling fan at all, but it looked interesting. So you're going to go see it?
I believe so. For reasons I don't want to bore our audience with, I'm sort of stuck alone and solo. So I was like, oh, well, why don't I go see a movie that, nobody in my rest of my family will ever even entertain seeing?
Your wife and daughter will not want to see the wrestling movie.
No. So I'm like, oh, I'm going to go see The Iron Claw. So there's one showing at the mall theater closest to where I'm at that I'm going to go see if I can't hit.
You know what I recommend is Godzilla -1.
I know. I hear that's great. I have heard that.
It was good. And it took me a while to realize what the -1 part meant. But it was a great movie. So the -1, because they make no reference to it in the movie. The -1 is a reference to Japan being at ground zero, at zero, right after World War II. And so what they're saying is with the appearance of Godzilla, now it's Japan has sunk lower fictionally as -1. But the movie is really good. There's no agenda. There's no stupidity like Disney does. It's just a great story, decent movie. So I recommend Godzilla -1.
Yeah, it is kind of the sleeper hit. And it got nominated for, I think, effects, I believe, in their recent Academy Award nominations.
See, I have a general proposition, that if a movie is nominated for an Oscar, that means it's a terrible movie and I shouldn't see it, for the most part. There are exceptions, but that's my general rule.
You're even extending that to the technical categories?
Yes. Damn it, yes, absolutely.
All right. Well, you're nothing if not consistent, Steve.
I saw Oppenheimer. And it's like, the first 2 hours are interesting. The last hour of it is the denouement that didn't need to happen. I could have summarized the last hour of Oppenheimer in a scrolling screenshot of 30 seconds. That's all we needed to see. So no, Oppenheimer is not a great movie.
Yeah, I have no real interest on that one. But I am going to go see The Iron Claw. So, Steve. So lots going on. We're recording this on Saturday morning, so it's within 12 hours, basically, of news breaking that Vince McMahon is now out again. Although we can break down how this makes sense, because he's now resigning from TKO, which is a company sort of, I guess, above or that envelops the WWE.
The parent of WWE.
Yeah. But so he's just in trouble, but that company has been in the news a ton, including the kind of gobsmacking, almost $5 billion Netflix deal. So where do you want to jump in, Steve? Do you want to be the most newsy and just look at old Vince's trouble and then back it up from there?
Yeah, I was going to start with Vince. So we go back a few months ago. I don't know, 6 months ago maybe, something. We did briefly a story about how Vince McMahon had resigned from his position and whatnot, and we universally thought, both of us thought it was a bit. And it seemed to kind of be a bit because he returned a couple months later and was right back in it and, doing all his Vince McMahon nonsense. Well, this one doesn't seem like a bit. So if you want to, there, it's all over the place, but where Chris and I both saw this kind of independently was ESPN. Vince McMahon resigns from TKO day after ex-employee's lawsuit. Mike Coppinger, January 26th. So what this says here, and by the way, he's 78 years old, but a former employee filed a sexual misconduct lawsuit. Somebody named Janelle Grant, who I think appears to be a behind-the-scenes person, says works in WWE's legal and talent departments, alleged that McMahon forced a sexual relationship on her, passed around pornographic pictures and videos of her to other men, including other employees, and so she has sued him. And her allegations is that it started in March of 2020. The lawsuit, which I have not pulled and have not read yet, because we just saw this last night. It says it includes several text message screenshots purportedly being McMahon asking for depraved sexual acts. And no, I do not have what that means, what that meant for the more base among you. But he immediately resigned on this, which would kind of give you a hint that perhaps there's some truth to it, number one. And number two, it just, again, it seems like this is more real than the other thing. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I agree, and it's also cumulative, right? So, I mean, in the article that we reference and that you can get as a link in the show notes, does go back and kind of revisit those earlier cases. So you also start to build like kind of momentum in this as a trend with Vince McMahon. Yeah, it was interesting. It looked like the last time what actually happened was an independent group or lawyer, whatever, somebody estimated how much of the company's money Vince used for payoffs and hush money, tallied that up, and then I think it's something in the neighborhood of 16 million, and then made Vince buy back, basically pay back the company coffers, and he walked right back in. This is all around the same time that this merger with the UFC, right? Am I getting my acronym right?
No, that's correct. Yeah, that's correct.
The merger with UFC was happening. That this then created, which we also talked about, and which is a pretty, is a big business story, and really kind of sets the table for what's going on now in a way, because TKO now is that parent company, as we mentioned, and that's actually what he's stepping away from. I think it would technically where he was in some kind of leadership, or the lead. So also there's this. So this isn't just Vince's WWE world at this point either, right? So there are other players. In fact, The Rock, can you smell what I'm cooking, is joined the TKO board. And actually, I saw kind of a funny clip of him on First Take where he's basically saying he's going to go do another WrestleMania. So that looks like, the board member of TKO, he's going to be a proactive participant in that growth in this new company. And so does all of this, you just wonder what the kind of boardroom level machinations got us to here with Vince. I doubt that these were just 12th hour allegations that sunk him.
No. Yeah. So, by the way, the first thing happened in July of 2022. So it was a year and a half ago, not 6 months ago, like I said. But here's the thing: this is a publicly traded company, and so there's a limit to the amount of drama you can fake when you're talking about publicly traded companies, because if you do not, nonsense and pull stunts like that, you can open yourself up to shareholder derivative lawsuits, FCC or SEC complaints, potentially if you're jerking around with people's stock prices by, faking things like this. And so I do think this one is more real than the others. And again, like you said, with the presence of TKO, which is UFC, it's just another level here. And the thing is, like, you don't need Vince McMahon to run the business. You can get a lot of people to run the business. Vince McMahon's real value was that he himself was a part of the fictional storyline, and people loved him. at least loved his character. And I think that kept him around far longer, than he should have, because you just can't have this. I mean, look, it's no wonder this guy's buddy Donald Trump. I mean, they get in trouble with the same kind of nonsense. It's the same exact allegations. So it's more than time for him to go. The company would be better off having somebody more professional in charge and being the public face of it. So I think they're doing the right thing here. Now, the statement, Chris, you want to do the statement in the voice? The ESPN column published the statement, and we both thought it was an hilarious statement. If you just look at it from picture Vince McMahon in front of a camera between wrestling matches and going over and doing this. Here, I'll try it.
Go for it. I'm just trying to get it in front of me.
Yeah, it's in the middle of the ESPN story. So here's the statement. Now picture tears, like over the top tears with this. I stand by my prior statement that Ms. Grant's lawsuit is replete with lies, obscene made-up instances that never occurred, and is a vindictive distortment of the truth. I intend to vigorously defend myself against these baseless allegations and look forward to clearing my name. Pause. However, out of respect for the WWE universe, the extraordinary TKO business and its board members, shareholders, partners, constituents, and all of the employees and superstars who helped make WWE into the global leader it is today. Pause. Dramatic pause. I have decided to resign from my executive chairmanship and the TKO board of directors, effective immediately. Shocked silence from the people in the room.
Drop mic, yeah, the whole thing.
Yeah, there you go. That's his statement. And it's a fairly average statement in terms of writing, but when taken into the context of that this guy has lived a fictional life for the past 50 years, roughly, I think it's hilarious.
Totally. And when we talked about this story, I guess a year and a half ago, I agree, it seems like not that far away, but time is a flat circle and all that. But it felt still like a McMahon story. Remember, the wife was involved and the daughter and blah, blah, blah.
Oh, it was all the people have been playing along for years.
Right. They'd all been on camera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, now this, you do really kind of step back, and it's a different board game. And you even read this article, and there are much less, right? But what I did find interesting, to your point, where, his real genius was actually the writer, the lead barker, basically the creative driver of WWF and then WWE. In fact, just surviving that brand change, you have to give him credit for from a business standpoint.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But a year and a half ago, one real change that I think is actually a little bit under-discussed here is that he hasn't had creative control since then. And that has actually gone over. Now, still, we stay in the family. It's this son-in-law, who is famous wrestler Triple H, who's been the one that's actually been the creative driver. So that piece had already been transitioned. And, we've seen no less interest in wrestling, no lack of creativity, no great groundswell of fans complaining. In fact, we have a pretty good data point that wrestling's doing fine, considering that the Netflix deal is up to $5 billion. So that would tell me that wrestling as a product is still viable, and that Triple H apparently has driven that creative car fine since Vince was pushed out of that.
Well, yeah, you don't need Vince McMahon to develop storylines. You get some Hollywood creative writer types in the room, and boom, there you go. And Triple H, maybe he's one of them. But the best reason why we know that this is legit, this is the lawyer guy coming in, in me coming out. This lawsuit by this woman, Janelle Grant, is a real lawsuit that was filed in federal court in Connecticut. Now, one thing you don't do is file phony lawsuits in federal court. Especially in any court, but especially federal court. Federal judges are humorless, and if you file something that's just nonsense, and you can't just file a nonsensical lawsuit that's without basis because it's a wrestling storyline. You're going to get sanctions. The attorneys who did it, are going to get, you could get put your license to practice law at risk. So the lawsuit, it's a real allegation. Whether or not she can prove her case is another matter, but it's a real allegation. So I think that by itself shows that there is some truth to his conduct, that is not just a storyline. Probably. I mean, again, I'm not saying this is not a Me Too show here, believe all women show. It's what I'm saying is she's made a legitimate allegation against him, that kind of lends some credibility to the other stories about him. That's what I'm saying.
And the story does allude to physical evidence, right? Text messages, screenshots, blah 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 of what she's alleging. Now, who knows? None of us have seen it. Doesn't feel like
I'll try to pull it, and maybe we'll do it on another show.
Right. So, but they are feeling pretty confident about what they have. This from the way that this is reported. What do you think, Steve, about, I kind of was blown away by this Netflix news on two fronts. One, not just everyone's been predicting that at some point Netflix is going to start to dip their feet into live sports. And we've talked many times about the value of the WWE, and their, and covered different business stories about their growth and their market and different media deals that they've gotten, which we've always sort of been surprised at their size. And this one just feels like a tidal wave. So I'm sort of surprised that this is Netflix's first thing. Maybe the low stakes of it already being fake by design. But then with that price tag, this surprised me.
You're not faking $5 billion.
No.
So the Netflix deal, it mentions this in the ESPN story. It's $5 billion, but I'm trying to see if you remember.
I think it's $500 million a year. Oh,
yeah, I think it was 10 years, 500 million. So there you go. So $500 million a year. That really surprised me. Netflix seems to be drowning in cash. Number one, I mean, where's all this money coming from? I mean, how many things can they buy? I mean, how many subscribers do they have? With no advertising revenue on these things at all.
Well, no, that's not true. They have ad now. The lowest Netflix subscription has ads.
Oh, it does. Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay, that may mean I'm paying more than I need to for Netflix. But anyway, it surprises me how much money they're putting in. But yeah, I think and Netflix has historically gone kind of overboard sometimes. And the money they pay people, they've paid like comedians tons of money for stand-up comedy shows, and they paid Barack and Michelle Obama some ridiculous amount of money for stuff mostly people nobody watched. I mean, and it's not political. I'm not getting political on it. I'm just saying they've done that, and there's been many others. And so to some extent, this is kind of another thing by them. But $5 billion, even for Netflix, is a ton of money. I think for me, in my head, kind of minimize the impact of wrestling on the entertainment world, because I'm not really much of a fan of it, and so I don't pay attention to it. But they mention in the column that the Raw, the show Raw is a huge draw and their biggest draw. And so I think the idea here is they're going to put Raw on Netflix streaming live and bring that audience with them. But I think the Raw show has a much bigger impact than I'm giving it credit for.
There have been some executive shakeups at Netflix, and some of the executives that sort of oversaw a lot of those blank checks, whether, if it was TV showrunners or different things, have exited. But they are doing fine. You can make a case that they won the streaming war already, because now all the other streamers are licensing their content to them. So sort of shows that, they all came home to Netflix in the end. But this one surprised me. The strategy doesn't surprise me, right? So we want to experiment with doing stuff that's live, which, that's without a net. That's like antithetical to what Netflix is, right? So it's a big production, it's a big cost. So but this is the lowest stakes thing, right? High stakes to see if you can pull it off, if you can bring the audience. Can you actually produce a live event? Will the consumer even equate you with a live event? There's a lot to overcome. So you do it with something like wrestling, which is fabricated by design and common understanding. And it's like this high reward, low stakes type of thing. That strategy makes sense to me. I just, and I'm not I don't have the real numbers in front of me, and I'll, if anything's at that price tag, I'm going to believe that both sides see that it's worth that. But I would never have thought you'd put that kind of price to that kind of strategy. It also tells me that somebody like Netflix, I don't think is in the running for like a piece of the NBA deal that'll come, that's going to get negotiated soon, because they must not have the confidence that they can pull that off if they want to practice with something like the fabrication of pro wrestling.
Yeah, but are you calling that practice though? I mean, pro wrestling. I think the ratings in NBA are down right now, and pro wrestling is up. So I don't know if it is, but maybe this is just what they could get a hold of more
I
so
just think
than
it's just because if the stream goes out or whatever, it's fake. What you're putting on live is fake, right? So
Yes.
unlike something that's happened where like, a game of any kind is sort of I don't even care, or news, right? The consumer's got to know that that's going to stick, right? So I do understand. I don't think it's about popularity even. I just think it's about one's fake and okay, fine, it's live, great, is a half step towards this is live, and second by second it matters what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's fair. I think Netflix sees the future. Netflix has been pretty visionary. I mean, if you go all the way back to the beginning of them, they had a business model that everybody laughed at, and Blockbuster Video laughed at them, more specifically. And obviously, look what happened. They put Blockbuster Video out of business. And so I think in this case, Netflix is seeing that because there's so many streaming services now, they haven't been able to license the products, the shows and the events, not events. They haven't been able to license the shows and the movies that they really wanted to for a long time. So I think in order to compete, they have to get into sports and live stuff. And yeah, maybe okay. So this is the first, dipping the toe in the water. And I think your point is because it's scripted, you can kind of control the circumstances and the time, and they know all of that. So maybe
There's less variables.
Maybe it's them practicing, but I also think there's just a component of what's available right now. The NBA has done their media deal. No, they haven't done their media deal. Yeah, it's coming up, but but it's coming up. But the baseball deal isn't open now. The NFL deal is not open, and so there's not really anything to do. So they get Netflix, or Netflix gets wrestling because they can.
It's a tell to me. I mean, we'll see. I think if I'm like ranking, because we look forward to the NBA deal, some version of Warner Discovery and ESPN. And when I say Warner Discovery, that means TNT, by the way. And so Disney and Warner Discovery will get chunks of that deal, which is status quo. And then most people are predicting there are slots, maybe 3 and 4, where either like an NBC could come in and like do like a Peacock deal, or you get one of these pure streamers. If I'm ranking those now, I would move Netflix down the list of probables given this move.
Oh yeah. Oh, you think so? Well, I mean, why though? Because the money?
I think this is where they decide to spend their money, and I don't think they have the confidence that they can give those leagues what it needs as a live broadcast partner. I mean, there was legitimate holding of breath about Amazon's Thursday night package, because the expectation is a clean viewing experience, right? Once they proved they could handle that, that was like a game changer, I think. But I don't know if Netflix has their own confidence in that. So to me, this is what they spent their money on.
Yeah, that may be fair. I mean, they've got to be able to trust that Netflix can do it. Well, the easy thing about the Amazon, of course, is they're just kind of duplicating what's already been done. I mean, they're literally just kind of taking the same broadcast and.
They just can the network handle 30 million people watching one thing? I mean, did you see that Peacock game was literally like set a record for band? Yeah. I mean, so those I'm talking about that like they didn't have, like, can this actually work technically? And apparently it can.
Yeah, no, I did see that, and I'm trying to simultaneously find the Vince McMahon lawsuit in Pacer while we're talking. If those of you wondering what the clicking is, This is now me going, I should have done this last night at 10 o'clock. So if I can pull it up here while we're talking, I'm just trying to find my password. I mean,
Netflix called this hit in.
Pardon me?
You think Netflix called this hit in? Like, you got to get Vince out? Open
No, I know, because I mean, I know you're kidding, but it's not. It shouldn't be lost on anybody that this is a publicly traded company, and you don't mess around with things like that for a publicly traded company. If it was still a private company, yeah, maybe. Maybe so, but not because I'm telling you, you don't want to open yourself up to that. It's too many SEC problems and all of that. So no, I do not. Okay, let's see. By the way, he's 78 years old. I mean, when is this guy going to be done?
maybe now.
Yeah, well, maybe, yeah. I mean, can anybody, what's he doing? Like, seriously. I don't get it. I don't know if there's anything more to this that we can say about the wrestling story. What do you think the UFC thinks of this?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of new players that are like, when it was just machinations of the McMahons, they could move money and blame and leadership around, over family dinner. But, when you got the Netflixes and the TKOs and the UFCs and all these other huge partners, they don't want to see their investments, their money messed with. And I think they've got to be. That's why I'm not going to let go of the fact that there are moments of orchestration where this was always going to be a version of the outcome, which was he would get exited.
I don't know, man. I mean, again, but I still can't get past the fact that this is a real lawsuit. This is not something you fake. This is not something you mess with. So the last time, yes, but I just can't. I'm not down.
I don't mean they're faking it. I mean that the other corporate partners always had a way, which they knew that Vince McMahon could not be involved with this much longer. I mean that.
Why would anybody want Vince McMahon involved?
Right. So
in this.
So this was all. These were all negotiated pieces.
Okay, I have now found the lawsuit.
Does it have all the pictures?
Well, I'd say it's opening. I'm view document. So here we go. If I had a better computer, this would take a little shorter amount of time. Here we go. Okay, now it's coming up. All right, complaint. So Janelle Grant. So this is filed in the U.S. District Court for the District of Connecticut. The defendants are she sued the World Wrestling Entertainment Inc., Vince McMahon, and then John Laurinaitis. Tell me again who John Laurinaitis is in the story, but who is John Laurinaitis? I've forgotten.
Let's see if I can find it. I don't remember.
Okay, while you're doing that, it's the plaintiff Janelle Grant, as a former employee of WWE, was a victim. This is paragraph 1 from the petition. Who was a victim of physical and emotional abuse, sexual assault, and trafficking at WWE. Ms. Grant is filing this lawsuit not just to address her own suffering, but also to act for those who are afraid to speak out. Says McMahon lived in a penthouse duplex in Ms. Grant's apartment building. The two met in March of 2019 when Ms. Grant was dealing with profound grief and struggling financially. On top of that, she was unemployed and her family home was lost in her parents' bankruptcy. Her family passed away. Ms. Grant dedicated herself to finding gainful employment. Okay, and this goes on to say that basically McMahon kind of, what this is implying, that McMahon is preying on her, a vulnerable woman in a time of need, basically. That's what she's alleging here. Says he demonstrated increasing lack of boundaries. He greeted her in his underwear, touched her repeatedly, asked for hugs, spent hours sharing intimate details about his personal life. asked to keep their closeness a secret. After succumbing to the pressure for a physical relationship, Miss Grant was slotted to an entry-level position. So she's saying that once McMahon finally slept with her, at that point, then he agreed to employ her. Temporarily relocated to the XFL for a while. McMahon began sharing sexually explicit photographs and videos of Miss Grant, including pornographic content he recorded. So she's alleging that he recorded sexual encounters between the two of them and then passed it around to people at the WWE. Classy, if true. I'm going to flip through. It's 85. I can't read all this on the air, so I'm going to flip through to see if there's images of text messages here. Yeah, there's a lot here, obviously, and I can't read this live on the show, of course. Okay, let's see, factual allegations.
By the way, John Laurinaitis was the former head of talent relations and general manager. So basically the talent lawyer, the lawyer for dealing with the front of the camera folks.
Okay, I tell you what, this is way too much for me to do this on the air like this. So let's move on, and I'll kind of keep, if anything comes up that's really amazing that I see, I'll bring it up.
All right, sounds good. So we have time. Let's see. We have a little bit of time left. We can jump away from the life inside the squared circle. Kobe Bryant's foundation, the Mamba Foundation, I believe it's called, right?
I might be Mamba and Mambacita here. Before you get into it, let me give the site here. So we saw this in Sportico, and the column was called Kobe-inspired Mamba Foundation amasses cash but spends little by Daniel Libet, January 16th. And it's the Mamba and Mambacita Sports Foundation. So go ahead.
So basically, here's the long and the short of it. As a nonprofit, they've taken in a lot of money, mostly due with licensing deals to their stuff in their own existing corporate universe and licensing and whatever. Those are the chief income, as well as donations. And apparently was anonymous and then identified $10 million donation. So they're bringing in revenue as a nonprofit would, donations, licensing deals, etc., and then giving away hardly any of it, which has gotten them into some hot water, and more importantly, probably got them into their legal tax status being threatened in a way that would make this much less of a shell laundering profit center.
I don't know if I would call this laundering so much, because that would imply that they're spending the money, they're taking the money and spending it in nefarious ways. This is more, if true, more like negligence. Like they got a ton of money, upon the tragic death of Kobe Bryant and his daughter, and so they got all these gifts and they haven't done anything with it. The laundering part would mean that the wife is like spending the money on, something, like a car.
Well, I would argue that they're laundering money to the support staff. So there's a 250 legal, one law firm, same law firm that represents multiple Kobe estate issues. So to me, the laundering is they're taking in the money through these nonprofit ways, and then they're using that to pay their overall bills. So legal, accounting, I would argue that this is a way for them to use the nonprofit to pay for things and take it off the books, and then they pocket more money in those other corporate interests, because it's the same folks. So to me, they just build $250,000 to that law firm and they wash it through the nonprofit.
It could be. It depends on what the bills are and all of that. So the amount of money we're talking about, according to the column, they have apparently spent. The foundation itself has spent $481,953 on program expenses. Included in this, legal, what you're talking about, $250,259, accounting, $193,854, and then the compensation for the guy running the place, Conlon, $198,799. And so, listen, I mean, $250,000 is a lot of legal fees for a foundation that's done relatively little.
Yeah.
There's been no lawsuits. There haven't been major property acquisitions. You don't need a ton of lawyers to contribute to something. You would if you're gonna, if the foundation is gonna be like a grant participant in a grant to build a school or build a basketball court, you need lawyers to do that. But $250,000 is a lot for that. So I think that's your point.
Yeah,
Then
I've given away so in my work as a program officer, a number of stops, which is basically the people that make decisions and then process the grants, give the money away. 250, 500,000, $1 million grant. First of all, I'm using mostly templates that are already pre-approved from the lawyers, right? So I'm using tooling that already a lawyer is paid for. We probably paid for 5-6 hours of time, right? And then on top of that, if they're needed at any one point, we're counting that in hours. So I may be using at maximum I'll just be like a drunk sailor. 10 hours of legal time to give away $500,000. So, if they're giving away pennies compared to that, I fail to see that you need that kind of legal fees. And I understand the licensing and some of that is to manage the money coming in, but that sort of speaks to this, I just believe that Kobe Inc. or whatever, the estate of Kobe Bryant, is washing their bills through this. Which is kind of low stakes. It's not like like in the end, what do we talk? We tallied up those professional fees that they list? It's like $1 million.
Well, yeah. I mean, the column alleges they spent $481,000 and change.
Right, and $1 million to process that.
I mean, 10 hours isn't a lot of time to do something like if there's like a grant agreement that's a major agreement for a lot of money. 10 hours is not a lot of money, not a lot of time. But even if you bump it up to 50 hours, for some major project or 100 hours, it's still not anywhere close to this.
I mean, I've managed $1 million grants, and we have not touched 10 hours of legal time.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what we're talking about. If they're involved in a real estate deal, that's another matter. Like I do these every day. If it's, because that's a ton of time and money. I mean, it's what I do. But yeah, just like a simple grant, we're going to donate.
They're cleaning up basketball courts.
Yeah, and so that should not be a ton of time. Can I divert just one moment?
Sure.
So, the McMahon petition does have screenshots of text messages in here. And some of them are so vulgar, I don't want to read them out loud. But I'll read part of the first one. So what this is a image screenshot purportedly from McMahon to this woman, Miss Grant. And this doesn't have a context, okay? It's just McMahon. I quote, "I love it. That's you, Janelle. You can't get enough. You can't get enough, can you? In the future, it's going to be so bad that you'll demand to be effed twice a day and not just with a name that they've blacked out in a three-way. Why not let others see the beautiful, voluptuous body and you can watch you shake uncontrollably when you orgasm, with another word. They'll go out of their minds." And it goes on. And so there's more of this in here, and there's a couple of them that are extremely vulgar that would make me uncomfortable to read even on this show. Like something you'd find in a pornographic movie type of language. So that's the kind of crap that McMahon was apparently sending this woman who, by the way, was his employee. So there you go. Sorry. So that's crazy.
He'll claim it was consensual.
Yeah. But and there's more of them in here. And again, I'm just kind of doing this on the fly. So so I didn't mean to divert, but since I made a point of saying it, so there you go. Anyway, so Kobe, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to go so far as to call it laundering necessarily. I mean, maybe they're spending more than they should. I think the real crime isn't that. Well, no, that's not true. I mean, if they're literally money laundering, that is a crime. But the real sin here is that all these people gave money and they've done absolutely nothing with it productive, essentially. If you've got, how much was it? $27 million? $27 million. Do some major projects. Don't clean up basketball courts. Build a basketball court. Fund a scholarship program for underprivileged children. Maybe. Homelessness. fund a basketball team for, you know, girls basketball teams, elite. There's a lot of things you could do, and what it appears as though they've done none of it. And to me, that's the real sin.
Sure, I don't disagree, but it was never going to do that. So there are so many loopholes in the way we run nonprofit structures that allow this to be part of a holding, right? So it was always intended to be a pass through. I'll pull it down from laundering. It was always intended to be a pass through. The idiocy to me is that they didn't beyond the do-gooder stuff. The idiocy is that they didn't know how to do the bare minimum. And all that's going to happen here is they would get busted down to being labeled as a private foundation, which is less of a tax break and so on and so forth. I mean, this is very tax table actuary type of stuff at its core, and so they should have been smart enough to know they have to give away X amount to protect their status. And they should have known, and the fact, if they are in fact surprised that this is hitting the public, they are insane, because it's very clear that the stipulations are that this information has to be published publicly. It's the private company doesn't have to do that. This is a key distinction in the differentiation of the tax status which they have. So everyone was always going to know this. And so on two levels, both let's just make sure we tick all the boxes to protect our tax status, which to your point would be just give it away to more schools, find one recipient and give the amount. It would be very easy to check that box and allow the nonprofit to do its real job within their estate holdings to be a pass through. I mean, look at anybody that's this level of money. They all have these. So, and then not to know that there would be a public, a black eye, us reading this article, just talking about the story, because it's like, how do you have $27 million and give away 400,000? So there's also
given
that.
Away 400,000, they spent it on expenses. They haven't given
right,
much anything.
So it was just, to me, remarkably dumb that they got a lot of bad advice, because this was actually much easier to do, still scammy, and they didn't even do those parts right.
And there's an easier way, by the way, because this was started by Kobe, this foundation. And if the wife, Vanessa, doesn't want to do it, they don't have to do projects. They could have taken this money and given it to another bigger charity. Give it all to Catholic Charities or whatever, established the United Way, something. And they could have just liquidated most of it, and then it would have been fine and been done.
What most people would do, or what a common thing is they do something called a donor advised fund, where you take that money and you park it at a bank. And then, it's probably the nonprofit wing, or part of the bank that manages this. Then they manage that money, or some entity. It doesn't always have to be a bank, but bank's the easiest one. And they actually manage the programmatic use of the money. And the reason it's called a donor advised fund is because Kobe Bryant's wife, or whatever mechanism on that side, would be able to help direct, would be the final decider, but there'd basically be an entire staff that would do.
They have pros to manage it and do it.
And that's, you say park it. We're going to park it at Bank of America's donor advised fund, and we'll get like a philanthropic banker, money manager, who will hire and manage a staff that say, yeah, we're gonna do midnight basketball in 50 cities. Okay, and they would just put that program through, and they do it, and you check all the boxes. That's how, if you really want to that's another way. That's how you do it.
Yeah, I mean, because I'm saying this with all due respect to Vanessa Bryant. I'm not trying to disparage her in any way, and she suffered a tragic loss here, but she's wholly unqualified. She's a high school graduate. She's the wife of a basketball player, and she's most likely wholly unqualified to literally run something like this. And you could bring in Kobe's advisors or whatever, but having like pros, you're kind of saying a different version of what I was saying. And the nonprofit world way better than I do, and so that sounds like a reasonable thing to do. And you'd have a whole team of people who do nothing but manage money for a living doing it. You would be getting no trouble whatsoever. There'd be no IRS question. Instead, what we have here is a woman who's probably still grieving the loss of her husband and her child, who now is sitting on $27 million. And it's I'm not going to say secondary, but I guess I am going to say it's kind of secondary, in her life. And I'm not trying to disparage her. Don't get me wrong, please. But I think that's the problem here. And so she would be wise to do what you're suggesting, or again, what I'm suggesting, which is give it all away or whatever. But that would be by far the best thing.
Instead, she got the advice from probably the same lawyers that got this paycheck that said, this is how we're going to manage it. We're going to establish this. We're going to, use this nonprofit for X. We're going to use this LLC for Y. And we'll pay bills out of X, Y, and Z that way. So she got advice that was sort of almost antithetical to that. It was always a mechanism for lowering her tax burden.
Yeah. Well, yes, absolutely. And I think, a lot of, the fact that there's the Mamba and Mamba Foundation, that's not that surprising. There's a lot of athletes at his level have things like this. And I think this applies to charities in general. And this is why you always have to be careful about what you're donating to. Don't just donate to a charity because you like the name behind it. Some charities are really good and they do a lot with their money. Others do nothing with their money, and this seems to be one that's currently doing nothing with the money. And so there's many ways. Chris knows this way better than I how to do it, but there's ways to look into exactly how much money they're spending on actual charitable activities, and then how much they're spending on admin, and how much they're just not spending. Period. So I would advise people to donate your money to a charity you're confident is doing good, not doing nothing just because it has a big name behind it.
100%. And basically, if you're a nonprofit, you have to publish your tax return. That's essentially what it boils down to. And then all the corresponding documentation about that, which then is leadership salaries. I think it's any salary above 225, I think has to be listed salary and name, on those filings. So yeah, you can go see what an executive director is paid. You can go see what their overhead was. And so the key thing is how much a real base number is what is the percentage of money they give away compared to what they have. And the federal government on those that makes, I think it's 5. There's ones like, the big bankers, the robber baron era bankers, or great men of industry of that time, the Rockefellers, et cetera. Those foundations are mandated by law to give away 5% of their holdings every year, I believe.
Oh, is that the number?
Yeah, for that, there are different kinds, but for that kind, your Carnegie Foundation, your Rockefeller Foundation, these ones have been established to last, really centuries. Ford, what's the total holding of that entity, or corporate entities that are subsidiaries, and then 5% of that net has to be given away each year to maintain that status.
I mean, I think it's kind of sad that, generally speaking, you have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a CEO of a nonprofit. But it's a catch-22, because if you don't spend that much money, you won't attract someone who's capable of managing lots of money. And so it's going to go horribly wrong. So you have to spend that much money to make sure it's run appropriately. So it's not always the worst thing in the world if you're paying somebody $250,000, or pick your number. I think and so, but the public sees it and goes, "What is this?" But you have to find good people to do it. It's a lot of money.
It is. No, it's just this is what people. And I maybe I'm being overly cynical about my own industry, but people assume or see nonprofit and they think doing public good, and that's what it's supposed to do, and in many cases does. I don't want to disparage that, but it really is just a different set of rules about running a endeavor, an entity, a project, a company, and the how we collect and assign tax. So it's really just a different set of rules to manage business.
Yeah, and I work with these nonprofit developers every day too, in my capacity, and they're business savvy. They have to be, because it is business. It's just business for the public good, essentially, but it is just business. You can look at if you want to donate. First of all, the Hogstye, we'll take your donation. We're not a charity, but I'll take it if you want to give us money. I'm kidding. Please don't do that. But no. Anyway, look at the percentage of money spent on administrative costs, and then look at how much money they're actually donating. Those two are easy to find, and so there are charities that aren't really scams but aren't doing anything, and this Mamba Foundation seems to be one, maybe for understandable reasons, but it is. So there you go.
The last I'll bore our audience with is the ethical standard is that usually 8 to 10% of the money that is given away should be tagged for admin.
How 10%?
About 10% of the money. So if it's $100,000 that you're trying to give away, 10%, you need 10,000 of that to manage the process of giving it away.
Yeah, and by the way, if you want, there's an easy way to look at this, like the Combined Federal Campaign, which is the federal government campaign. They publish materials every year where it lists all this stuff. There's probably other ways, but that's where.
Yeah, if you really wanted to look it up, candid.org. A couple services that did this merged into that company, but GuideStar, which is one of those companies that merged, was the one. I think you can probably Google that and still get to the place where you can look that up. I mean, just look them up. Now, sometimes it takes a while, so sometimes the most recent one you can look at maybe right now is like 21, 22. Like it's not real time, but you go into one of these services, you look up United Way, right? And you basically get the United Way's U.S. tax filings for the history of their existence.
Yeah. So there's lots of ways, but just to conclude this, my parting thought here is, I think this is really sad. I was a huge Kobe Bryant fan. But my second favorite basketball player ever behind Magic Johnson, and I really hate to see his legacy get tarnished by allegations that the charity that's in his name is either not doing anything or spending money inappropriately. It's really sad, and I hope to think that Vanessa Bryant can find people who can get it together and make it right, because I don't like it.
And if you run youth recreation services in the United States, this would be a good time to reach out to this foundation, because I'm guessing that they're going to be putting more money out the door here the next couple of years.
Really quick, because they have to.
So if you're a development officer for one of these kinds of services, you start doing your desk research now.
Call Vanessa Bryant or her people,
or the law firm listed in the article.
They'll definitely take your call.
All right, Steve. So we probably have run our course today.
I'm sorry, this was a little bit janky of a show because I was going back and forth with the petition.
It's fine.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you though, Steve. Give us your quick rant on the Baseball Hall of Fame. I do want to hear your 2-minute editorial.
Okay, we were skipping. We had a Baseball Hall of Fame story because the Hall of Fame came out. I have a problem with two things about the Baseball Hall of Fame. Number one, the voting process. What it does is it takes a certain number of people who've been in the Baseball Writers Association of America a long time, like 10 years, and they vote. And so there's like 400 something of these baseball writers voting. And I don't like the whole concept of writers being the ones voting, especially the only ones, more or less, or most of them, because the writers have agendas. They're not athletes. They're just journalists. I don't like that. And so the other part of it, again, there's a much longer rant with all this, but the other thing is, I don't know how, at the end of the day, a Hall of Fame is just a history museum. It's not that serious. And I think the idea that the Baseball Hall of Fame has excluded the greatest hitter in the history of baseball, and I say this as a Dodger fan, but Barry Bonds is the greatest hitter in the history of baseball, and as well as excluded one of the top 5 pitchers ever to play the game in Roger Clemens, basically because they're a-holes and they don't like them, is, I think, eliminates all credibility that this institution had. There was a way to put them in the Hall of Fame with the notation that there were allegations of steroid use made against both of them, but instead they've excluded them. And so now you have the history of baseball being told without 2 of the very greatest players ever to play because they just were not nice guys. And I think that's ridiculous. 2 minutes.
love him or hate him, a good example of this is that I believe in the Washington, D.C. DMV area, Tom Lavero is one of the major baseball writers. So
There you
there's,
go.
there's
Perfect. That guy has got more agendas than anybody out there. He's a terrible writer. He seems to be a grouch and just an awful guy. You wouldn't want to have dinner with him. Those are the people, and there's hundreds. There's 400 something of these people. They're not objective at all. I think they need to completely scrap the Baseball Hall of Fame voting system and start over from scratch. That's my.
I think it's the only major Hall of Fame where it's solely writer driven.
Yeah, well, the NFL Hall of Fame has gone to more of a balance recently, but they don't have nearly as many either. Because there's, like, Mike Greenberg from ESPN. Back when he had the what was that show called with Mike Golick? Whatever that show, the Rays radio show. I used to be a religious everyday listener to that. At one point, he said, Greenberg, that he had been invited to be a voter. Now, Greenberg, by his own admission, he said he declined the offer because he's not a baseball guy at all. He's just a bloviator on ESPN. He doesn't have advanced knowledge of the game at all, but they invited him to be a voter, and that kind of tells you about who some of these 400 people are, of which, like, Tom Lavero would also fall into that category. What the hell does that guy know?
I knew that would give him extra spark. I like you, Tom Lavero, but I thought that was a good example of Steve's point.
Yes.
All right. Well, there you go. Baseball Hall of Fame. Let Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens in, I guess. I don't know. You don't care about the steroids?
Oh, you can do it. You could say, because you tell the history of the game. This man has the best statistics ever of any baseball player ever. And then you put a line in there that says there were allegations of steroid use made against Barry Bonds. That's what you tell the story accurately.
I think that the point you make that these are history museums, they're not hallowed halls, is is like, like, come on.
This isn't the rotunda in the Capitol building, for God's sakes.
Right. If they do put Barry Bonds in, then I want to see all of the armor. They got the shin guards and the arm guard, in those last couple of years when he basically looked like a knight of the round table at every at-bat.
Yeah, he is. For those of you wondering, he's past the normal period now.
Right, he'd have to be a veteran entry.
Yeah, there's some veterans committee thing, and there's a couple of them. That's where he's in now. He's not going to get in.
No. All right. Well, with that, Steve, quick give an update on the Hogsty. As probably this week. Well, depends on how things play out, but you might have some news this week.
We might have some news this week. Of course, what Chris is talking about is Washington may have a head coach signed up, and if that is true, then we will certainly cover that on the Hogsty podcast, which is released every Thursday, and we have all of our regular written content every other day.
All right. Well, we will see you in 2 weeks.